So I can teach you everything that I want you to know in this amount of time. I've been preaching in Africa now for over a year, and they don't care how long I preach. So I have to make adjustments when I come back to America to try to get things back in a certain timetable and a time limit. But I want to tell you what I want to talk with you about this morning. I want to talk with you about my book that I just published called To the Ends of the World. Amanda and I are on our 7th year of mission work, and what we're doing is we're implementing a Pauline, an Apostle Paul type methodology around getting the gospel to the ends of the world. And this book is about how I believe we can get the gospel to every person, the message of the gospel to every person in the world in my lifetime. And I'm going to talk about that this morning as quickly as I can because I've got a lot of material to go over. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that a little bit later. But we're going to have a Bible study this morning, so I hope you brought your Bibles and talk about To the Ends of the World and how we can get there. You'll notice that at the very bottom of this slide is a website, where we have a website, Chad, the letter N, Amanda.com. ChadNAmanda.com. And if you go there, you can actually sign up right on the home page to get a monthly devotional, either written by me or by a Kenyan, sent to your email. It's a pretty neat deal. Okay, I want to start off with this question. How many of you are familiar with J.C. Choate? He's a missionary. Have you heard of J.C. Choate? He's an outstanding missionary. He died several years ago, but in the 1970s, he was in his prime in mission work all around the world, but specifically in the East. He went all over in the East. And he said this in his book called The Life of a Missionary. And I'm going to tell you, Joe, if you don't have this book, you need to buy it. It's not in print. It'll probably be banged up and used. That's the kind that I have, so the kind I can find. Okay. But it's not expensive, and this needs to be on the bookshelf of anybody interested in mission work. He's a member of the Church of Christ, and he is very sound, and this book is an incredible book. But this is what his book says. We would do well to consider first century Christianity, then take a good look at the present-day Christianity. While we are doing it, we should keep in mind that in Paul's day, the gospel was taken into all the world. But what about today? As surely as you know, we have not come near to the goal of evangelizing the world. But why not? Could it be that we are using the wrong methods? He wrote that in 1971. And I think that applies as if he had written it today. So we're going to entertain the question, what's going on? Are we getting the gospel to every person in the world like Paul did? So I want to ask these two questions. Do you think the gospel was really preached to the entire world during Paul's time? That's one thing we're going to look at this morning. We'll see what the Bible says. The second question, do you think the gospel can be preached to the entire world in our lifetime? When I say our, I'm referring to me. In my lifetime, if I live about 70 years, I'm 32 now, so in my lifetime, from now until 70, can we get the gospel to the ends of the world? So, let's open our Bibles and see what the Bible has to say. Romans chapter 10. Romans chapter 10. Boy, that is a very rich book. Paul did a number writing that letter. We're going to dive into it and try to understand some of the things he was saying. So we're going to look at Romans chapter 10 for a few minutes and go through that chapter. Now, let's examine and see what Paul wrote here. In verse number 18, I'll be reading from the English Standard Version. The Bible says, "But I ask, have they not heard? Indeed they have. For their voice has gone out to all the earth, and their words to the ends of the world." Now, I know Paul is quoting from the book of Psalms, but why did he put that verse into that chapter? Why did he put that there? That their voice has gone out to the ends of the world. What is chapter 10 really about? Look at verse 1 of chapter 10. "Brothers, my heart's desire and prayer to God for them is that you may be saved." So what are we talking about? We're talking about salvation, aren't we? Right off from the start, verse 1, he's talking about salvation. He goes on and he's continuing to talk about salvation throughout this chapter. And finally, referring to Israel. He's just come off of chapter 9, hoping that there would be many, if not all of Israelites would come to repentance, but he knew that they weren't. He knew that there would be a remnant that would, but he knew that the majority of the Israelites were not listening. And so in chapter 10, he talks about salvation, and while he's talking about salvation, he includes an Old Testament quote and says, their voice has gone out to the ends of the world. I'll tell you what I think that means. I think that means exactly what it means. That their voices, whose? The disciples, has gone out to the ends of the world. Now, let's continue to look at verse 21. He says, but of Israel all day long have I held out my hands to a disobedient and contrary people. So regardless of obedience, we're not talking about who's obeyed here. We're talking about, have they got the message out? And I think that's what he's saying. We've got the message out. Now, look at Romans chapter 16. There may be some people who disagree with what I'm pointing out here. That's okay. I still love you. You have to love me. Romans chapter 16. I want to read to you verses 25 and 26. 25 and 26. This is the close of the letter. Paul says, now to him who is able to strengthen you according to my gospel and the preaching of Jesus Christ, according to the revelation of the mystery that was kept secret for long ages, but has now been disclosed and through the prophetic writings has been made known to all nations, according to the command of the eternal God, to bring about the obedience of faith. Some people may look at this and say, well, he just means here that the prophetic writings and the gospel is now not just for Israel, but it's for all nations. That is true, and that's kind of a vague approach to this. I think what he's saying here is the prophetic writings and the preaching of the prophetic writings have been made known to everybody, to all nations on earth. Further, let's flip over to Colossians chapter 1. Colossians chapter 1. Okay, I'll be reading from verse 23. The Bible says, if indeed you continue in the faith, stable and steadfast, not shifting from the hope of the gospel that you heard, which has been proclaimed in all creation under heaven, and of which I, Paul, became a minister. What do you think? What do you think he's saying here? He's proclaimed to all creation. The gospel has been proclaimed to all creation. And didn't Paul kind of pass the torch to Timothy and in essence say, I finished the race? And he's telling Timothy, fight the good fight. But he's telling Timothy, I've been poured out as a drink offering. Paul felt like he got this thing done. Now, let's look at how he got it done. How did this happen? How did Paul get the gospel out in the time frame that he did? In Mark 16 and 15 and 16, that's a commission verse, as well as Matthew 28, where Jesus tells his disciples to go. We don't often talk about Acts chapter 1, verse 8. I think that is specifically for his disciples, not necessarily for us, where he tells his disciples to go to be witnesses to Jerusalem and Samaria. Can you believe it? Samaria. And to the ends of the earth, Jesus says. He tells his disciples, go to the ends of the earth. In Acts 1:8. And then we look at Acts chapter 2, which is the hub of the Bible. Now, when I say the hub of a wheel, what comes out of the hub of the wheel? Spokes. Many spokes, right? Well, if you look at the Bible, I think Acts chapter 2 is the hub of the entire Bible. Why I say that is, everything from the Old Testament points to it, and everything in the New Testament points back to it. The fact that in Acts chapter 2, Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection were known, were proclaimed, and they were realized, and the church was established. So I think the entire hub of the Bible, the entire forgiveness of sins that covered the covenants before, the Mosaic covenant, the patriarchal covenant, and then even in our covenant, all the sins of everybody was forgiven at the realization of what Jesus Christ did for them, which happened in Acts chapter 2. Now, in Acts chapter 2, verse 5, there's something that was very peculiar about that. The Bible says that there are people from all nations, verse 5 through 7, that came to hear. Now, he's talking about Jews that came to hear the preaching, or they came to Jerusalem for Pentecost, and they heard the preaching. So there was something very special that happened. There was a timing situation, surely, but when you look at Acts chapter 2, and you look at what happened after the conversion of the first Christians, they met daily, they worshiped daily, they ate together daily, they fellowshiped daily, and they even tried to stay in Jerusalem so long that other Christians began selling their possessions, selling their property, bringing money to that, laying at the feet of the apostles, so that all these these new Christians from all these other nations could stay in Jerusalem longer and continue the learning and continue the fellowship. But eventually, they all had to go back home. And they did. The travelers went back home. So, here's what happened. Compound Christianity is what happened. Now, we all like to think about it, at least. Compound interest and finances, because we think, well, hey, if I invest in this mutual fund or in that mutual fund or what have you, then what investors try to get done for you is, in 10 years, the money that you invested 10 years ago should be doubled, roundabout. But without you having to put more money into the market. That's called compound interest, or compounding finances or investments. When you put in money into a mutual fund, and that initial investment continues to work for you. You put in that dollar becomes $2 in 10 years because the interest and things continue to build. Now, the same thing can happen with Christianity, is what I'm trying to get to. And it did happen. So, let's suppose that in Acts chapter 2 there was 120 disciples, let's not suppose there were, who reached, and there was approximately 300 million people alive in the world during Paul's day. 120 disciples reached 300 million people. It would take, here's what happens, if one person tells one person the gospel, and that person tells one person the gospel. And that same pattern happens every year. If I tell somebody, and that somebody, if I tell Joel and Joel tells somebody, and then the next year, I tell Mountain and Mountain tells somebody. And then their somebodies tell somebody. If that just one new person a year, it would have taken them 23 years, starting with 120 disciples, with 300 million people, to tell every single person about the gospel. Not that they have to believe. God doesn't tell us we have to believe. It's a choice whether we believe. But it would take 23 years. Now, his claim in Colossians and in Romans date him about 30 years post-resurrection or post-Acts chapter 2. So it didn't take him 23 years, it took him 30 years. So they didn't quite meet this compound idea that I have, but they were pretty close. But they met it. They did a good job, and they did what they needed to do in their time frame. Compound Christianity for us. We have about 2 million members of the church worldwide and 7.5 billion people on the earth. If one person told one new person every year, it would only take us 13 years to tell the entire world about Jesus Christ and how to receive His salvation. That's pretty digestible. Just tell one new person a year, and tell that one new person, and tell one new person a year. I think that's very digestible. We're going to talk more about that during the sermon this morning. Now, let's talk about some problems or challenges. You see this map here. This map was actually a map constructed by a Roman geographer in the year 43. That's what he thought the world looked like. Well, we think that might be kind of silly because, as far as the land, the mass, and the earth is so much bigger than that. But as far as population, there wasn't that many people. 300 million people is just a drop in the bucket for 7.5 billion. So this is what they thought the earth looked like. So the problem we have today, the gospel has not been preached everywhere today. A lot more people. Our map is a lot bigger than that. contributing factors. There's multiple regions that did not exist during Paul's day that exist now. Okay? But I think this is the big reason why we're not doing it. We aren't working like Paul worked. And that's what we're going to talk about. That's what my book talks about. How can we work like Paul worked to get the gospel where it needs to get to? The Great Commission to go and make disciples of every other nation that is for the disciples of Jesus, the original 12 disciples of Jesus only. True or false? False. False. That's for us. So how do we do this today? I want us to kind of look back and remember that during the Acts chapter 2 time period, that was a perfect time period situation. Okay, they had a lot of things going on for them. The Romans, they had paved roadways. They had conquered much of the world. They had kept peace the best that they could, which was the best that the world had seen in quite a while. They had made an international, transcontinental language, Greek. Actually, the Old Testament was translated into it, called the Septuagint. So people were understanding one language. It was a perfect timing situation for the gospel to get to everywhere in the world at that time. But folks, I think we're back there again. And here's why. We have airplanes. I could get literally on the other side of the world in 2 days. Could you imagine what Paul would have thought about that? Are you kidding me? 2 days? We've got the internet, we've got cell phones, and we've got vehicles. We've got things that get us around and allow us to communicate really good. That's what they had back then during their time. They had better communication, the best that they've had. They had better roadways, the best that they had. They had better ways to travel back then than in years prior. Well, we're there again. I'd like to think about the third world countries. I mean, I've been to Haiti. That's the poorest country on this side of the hemisphere. They have cell phones. They live out of a cardboard box, but they have cell phones. They have cell phones and Coca-Cola. Cell phones and Coca-Cola have bridged every single barrier on our globe. Every single culture. Now, they get their stuff for a lot less. There's that whole economics. We pay for most of it, and they get, the cheaper stuff. And that's how that works. But here's my point. We've got internet and cell phones even in the hands of third world country people. We can communicate with them. That is huge for the gospel. We have an incredible time here. Now, let's talk about another reason why, and something else I talk about in my book. The indigenous method is what I call it. Now, this is a method by which we carry out mission work. A little different than the patriarchal method or the paternal method. The paternal method means you send a missionary in, he's the point man, he has the money, he makes the decisions, he builds congregations, he sets up an org chart of other local preachers who work for him, he sponsors them, and on we go, and the missionary becomes an administrator of funds and a project manager. I've done that before. I don't want to do that anymore. I want to do the indigenous method. You've seen me at Polishing the Pulpit for the past 2 years, and I've learned this from there. Edwin Cruikshank and Rod Rutherford, who have been missionaries in Africa for 50 years. And they said, Chad, don't do this, and this. I said, but I'm doing that. They said, don't do that anymore. We've done it 2 times over in Malawi and in Zambia. We quit doing it because we're back to simple preaching the gospel, getting teaching into the hands of the people, making Christianity more accessible. We want congregations to be self-supporting, self-governing, and self-propagating. We can't do that if we come in with our American ways and our American money and then set up a dependency structure. So, we need to increase accessibility to Christ, keep costs low on our end, and establish local leadership as quickly as possible. I'm working in Kisii, Kenya right now, and I'll show you a little bit more about that in a minute. But we need to compare the differences between Peter and Paul, because there's a comparison that needs to be made, and we need to be clear about what we're doing, who we're supporting, and how we're carrying out mission work. We've got a lot of people carrying out mission work like Peter. Yes, he went couple of places very temporarily. But folks, we see Peter in Jerusalem. He's an elder, he's stationary, he's there. This is pretty much how we see local preachers nowadays. They get into a place and they stay there. 4 or 5 years is the joke. But, you know, Jeff Trotter's been at Gold Hill for 22 years now. That is a Peter methodology. We do an awful lot of Peter methodology. It's not wrong. We just do too much of it. We need people who are out there working like Paul. The longest place he stayed was about 3 years in Corinth and 1.5 years maybe in Ephesus. But besides that, it was very quick. He got local leadership established. He left them. They had to figure it out. He came back. He encouraged them. He wrote them letters. But he was a mover and a shaker, but he was not one to stay because the dependency there. He wanted to get out. So when we look at Peter and Paul, we compared it. Peter was a fisherman, low economic status. He was less educated. He treated Gentiles like Gentiles. He had some struggles with that. He was a local preacher, local elder. Paul was a Pharisee of Pharisees, Roman citizen, dual citizenship, highly educated, persecuted Christians. He had some weaknesses and issues himself. He traveled far and wide when other people would not do that. They both came from an exclusive, isolated region. They both came from around the Jerusalem area and Palestine. They both converted thousands of people. They both contributed equally to getting the gospel to the ends of the world, but they carried out their missions differently. What I'm trying to propose is we've got enough missionaries operating like Peter who go stay in one country for several years. We've got enough of that. We need people like me who are going to go transcontinental, we're going to bridge, go cross borders, go to different places without staying in one spot to accomplish the spreading of the gospel. Gordon Cornwell University has incredible statistics and information, the best I've ever seen, on mission research across the globe. They've got numbers for every country. Here's something they put out. The red dots mean Christianity is not there. Can you believe there's still some in our country? That represents numbers of people, by the way, not specific locations, but the area is vague. It's the number of people. The biggest areas are in the east. They're in the east. We're working there. And we hope to move further east to your right, because that's where the greatest potential for growth is. Now, according to Gordon Cornwell statistics, the greatest opportunity for Christianity, the growth, is East Asia. That includes, not limited to, China. The reason being is that they have, East Asia has more than half the world's population there. Over 3.5 billion people are just right there. And another reason is that there's hardly any Christianity there compared to the numbers. Very, very big opportunities for big impact. The problem is they're not very receptive. I know that the church is in China. I know it has to be careful. I know it has to be underground. I've got some friends that are missionaries there right now, teaching public and teaching in their schools, and they're trying to do gospel teaching off to the side. But here's the point: the second biggest area for Christianity for growth is East Africa, which is where I am right now, and they are way more receptive. I'm invited to go speak in public schools. I've gone into public schools and have been dismissed for an entire day for vacation Bible school. You can go and teach. I've taught hundreds and hundreds of, I've had 400 people come to gospel meetings. You'll see that in the video I want to show you. Big time receptivity. We have a great methodology we're trying to implement. That's our plan. Preach in East Africa. We want to implement the indigenous method. We want to measure our work, and then we got to raise funds to do that. This is one of the first reports that I made when I came home this January. By the way, I started a preaching school. And what I mean by I started a preaching school is I found some existing buildings next to the church, one of the churches there, that they own. We put some new tin roofs on it. We painted it to make it look nicer, and put some skylights in there so that we could read. I provide food for 12 students who come to the school, and we go 2 weeks on, 6 weeks off, 2 weeks on, 6 weeks off, and I have classes. I've got a whole curriculum. It's on my website if you want to look at it, of how we're going to equip these 12 men over a 2-year program to help them be better preachers. There are existing preachers already. One of the things I walked into in Kissimmee when I was there was there's an existing 22 congregations. There's now 24 congregations. But the congregations are struggling, still are struggling. Some of them never taking the Lord's table, women leading worship, some of them playing instrumental music over speakers during their worship. Different issues going on. I walked in there not to be judgmental, didn't condemn anybody, was very quiet, made an assessment. I made a church directory of every congregation in Kissimmee. I've also posted that on my website. You can see the preachers, the churches, when they were established, etc. And after I did that, then I started with the idea of, the locals came to me and said, hey, we'd like to have a little preaching school so to get the preachers together and equip them. So I said, hey, let's go. So Golden Hill Road's funding that, and they're also overseeing that work. When I got back in January is when we started. I taught homiletics, New Testament, introduction to the New Testament. We had an evangelism day. We preached at 4 congregations. We visited an orphanage. We had a leadership seminar where 41 area-wide leaders came from the different churches there. And then I wanted to come home to my family because I was there for 3.5 weeks. That was my first trip this year. I started the work last year. This is the preaching school. I don't care about the building. You heard what I did with the building. The building is very insignificant. The significance are these guys. When I talk about a preaching school in Kenya, I want you to picture not a building. I want you to picture 12 guys ranging from the age of 28 to 63. Most of the guys are at least 15 years older than me. And these guys are out there on the ground in difficult conditions trying to teach and preach in Kissimmee. And we're trying to get them with the resources and the tools, the knowledge base. We call it the Goosey Preaching School because that is the area by which this is. It's called Goosey Land. Sounds a little different to us, but it means, well, their native tongue is Ekagoosey. So it actually comes from that word. But this right here speaks 1,000 words to me. And here's why. This is Job. We have, and the locals actually pushed, kind of helped us with this, but Job is the principal of the school. He's he's the brain. I'll just put it that way. This guy is smart. He's fluent in 3 different languages, and he's 39 years old. So he's one of the younger guys, but he has got it together, and he is taught already this year. This is him teaching his first class this year. And this is what I was telling you about with the indigenous model. We want to get local leaders up and running as soon as possible. We have already had 2 Kenyan teachers this year. We're going to have our 3rd Kenyan teacher that's going to come in November. When I finish teaching in November, he's going to come behind me and teach. We are getting local leadership established quickly so that I get out of the way. And you'll see me phase out of that. I want to show you a video. I'm going to do a little switch back here of the mission trip that I was recently on. I'm not going to be able to show you all of it because of time, but I just wanted you to see some things for yourself. Technology is also something we don't have to worry about in Africa because they don't really have it. All they need is the Bible. It may have come loose from that box. Loose connection over here.
And since we have the same father, that makes me your brother.
Sandy Cherry from Gold Hill was teaching at an orphanage, a deaf orphanage.
God told Noah that he was going to send a lot of rain. It was not hard. It kept raining harder and harder.
The angel stayed all night long. The lions' mouths were closed.
I'm just going to fast forward a little bit because we're kind of pressed for time. Just want to kind of give you guys a little the highlights. I'll show you this part. This is where we're preaching. There's over 400 people that came for this.
Which the Lord, the righteous judge, will reward to me on that day, and not only to me, but to all those who love his appearing.
You can't look up and see you lay down. Lazarus was down so long and so long on the ground that even the dogs came down to lick his sores. Lazarus was looking up at the dogs. You can't look up until you lay down. The rich man looks up. He sees Lazarus from far away. And he says, Nina Naka Mache! Nina Te Mache! Nina Te Mache Marine! My tongue is on fire! You can't be raised with Christ until you lay down in the water! You can't up in Christ until you've been carried down into the water!
That God walked with Adam and Eve in the cool of the day, just like now.
That street preaching there, we had 100 people come out for that.
We are delighted to tell you the story of Jesus, how he has saved us from our sin. We in churches of Christ hold up the word of God and believe the word and the word only.
Chapter 119 and verse 147, the Bible says, I rise before dawn and cry for help. I hope in your words. The cry from Kissy is hope, help, and the truth. Okay, that was your abbreviated version. I just wanted you to see a recent trip. That was from a trip I took a group with me in May. But I absolutely need help with teaching and preaching in Kenya. And not just getting me there, but also sending people with me there. I know Dean's interested in coming. That'd be great if you could help send him there with me. Where's my clicker? Can you advance the next slide for me? There we go. Okay, what I've done just in these past 12 months over there is that I put together that church directory, the preaching school, made assessments. I actually have an entire chapter 5 dedicated to the vision of Goosey in this book that talks to you about what the elders and I and the local people have put together on a 10-year plan with me phasing out by year 5. And what we plan to do each year, how I plan to move more out into the community, help the locals establish churches. Once they start doing that, I'm to another country or another part in East Africa. Rwanda, I'm looking at Rwanda because I'm learning Swahili. Rwanda speaks Swahili, and only 5% of their population are Christians. So I'm looking at that. There's some opportunity in Tanzania. But I had 36 personal Bible studies there, 48 gospel meetings, reached over 1,000 people, 120 hours with preachers there. Been working with an orphanage and a prison ministry. Could you go to the next slide, please? Okay, this is the book. I want to tell you another reason why you want this. And that's what it says here, right? So, why you want this is because this book right here is actually intended to be used as a 13-week Bible class. So, Joel, we can talk about this later, but I have free PowerPoint materials or free keynote materials available on my website where you actually go through each chapter and talk about the difference between Paul and Peter, implementing the New Testament mission methodology and trying to get the gospel to the ends of the world in our lifetime. So that's an opportunity to think about there. This also has in the back of the book, the last 3 chapters are 52 devotionals written by Kenyans. They take a scripture and then they tell you what it means to them. And that's to encourage you for 1 week for the rest of the year. So there's a spiritual application in it, but there's different things to look at in there. There's an entire chapter dedicated to local evangelism work. The study guide. Next slide, please. Okay, so I want to put this in your mind. How would you like to support a missionary that operates like Paul? Next slide, please. Oh, this is perfect. So I told my boys, okay, you got to, just get right to the hearts of these people and point at them because I'm going to ask them to help me. So this is what I'm trying to raise to get the work done. If 9 people would help me with $100 a month and take care of all my airline costs, including getting my family there next year, and we'd be done. If one person could help me with $100 a month, I could get Bibles. I could get 120 Bibles into the hands of the preachers who are converting people. That's not enough, but that is a start. And the 4 people, $100 a month for World Bible School lessons, that's $4,000. That's already been taken care of. I met with the Vice President of World Bible School, who has got me connected with a printing press in Nairobi, Kenya. They have translated World Bible School into Swahili, and the printing press is just waiting on me to get there in January, and they're going to print me enough materials to cover about 4,000 people. And I'm going to get all those materials printed, and then I'm going to bring it back. But all that's already done. So you can scratch that off. People are jumping in where they can. I'm back to just trying to get airline ticket money and Bible money. So you all consider that individually or as a congregation. Next slide. I think that was it. Good, because it's supposed to be, because we're out of time. But I'm excited about what's going on. There's a lot of great things that are happening. I'm not emphasizing baptisms. I used to do that. I don't do that anymore. Because baptisms doesn't tell us whether or not we're doing the work. And people staying faithful doesn't tell us whether or not we're doing the work or not. Bible studies tell us whether or not. Bible studies, how many Bible studies is your missionary having? That tells you the type of work that he's doing. How often is he preaching? How many gospel meetings? That measures the work of the Great Commission, not the number of baptisms. I can go to New Zealand and spend 3 years there and baptize maybe 2 people. I could baptize 100 people in 5 days in Kenya. The receptivity in different places. You can't measure the Great Commission off baptisms. You measure it off of whether or not you're doing the work. So that's why I haven't done it. We have had some baptisms in Kenya. But I'm interested in the preaching, in the Bible studies, and the teaching, and the equipping of making strong congregations, strong Christians, and making Christianity more accessible to East Africa. And the way we got to do that is we need more congregations, smaller ones, not the big mega churches. That doesn't work. If people are more than 6 miles away, 10 kilometers away from a church, they don't go because they don't want to walk 6 miles one way to church and back. Would you? So we need smaller congregations all over the place, which means we need more preachers, which means I've got a lot of work to do. Thank you guys. I look forward to worshiping with you.